All right. I am excited to welcome today's guest, Chris Donovan, COO of the Near Foundation, a former partner at Outlier Ventures, and a qualified solicitor. Chris brings legal and strategic expertise to one of the world's most forward-thinking L1 blockchain foundations, shaping how Web3 balances decentralization with regulatory compliance. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Yes. So Chris, you've navigated the Web3 world from a legal counsel to COO. What led you to take on this role at Near, and what excites you most about the foundation's direction today?
Great question. So yes, I was originally a lawyer. I describe myself as a lawyer in recovery, right? So I don't have to do much of the legal stuff anymore, although I'm grateful for the context and the problem-solving approach that the kind of legal background gives me, right? And in Web3, unfortunately, the law and regulation has played an overly large role, I would say, in the last 5 to 10 years or so. I think it's beginning to change now, and legal considerations can become somewhat more secondary than kind of driving a lot of the considerations, the structuring questions, tokenomics, all the rest of it. So I think this is a good thing for the state of the industry as a whole, but also for me, I've always been quite strategic and commercially minded. I've been a co-founder of a few businesses in the past, and so I've always wanted to try and expand the scope of what I'm working on as much as possible. Like, I've got the core legal skill set, but always wanting to try and take on more, broaden my scope, my experience, and also have a bigger impact. So yeah. I think the desire to have a big impact is what drove me to shift from a pure legal role into this much broader kind of operational one. And Near's a great place to be doing that because we do have an excellent platform. We've got amazing funding, but also some of the best technology in industry, and we can talk more specific about that maybe in a little bit. But just to answer the second part of your question around, what am I most excited about? I think I would say the way in which we are blending together the best of Web3 with the best of AI, right? So we're kind of very much at the intersection. We describe ourselves as the blockchain for AI. This is, Near's
I love it.
kind of story, right? And I think that when you think about some of the key features that blockchain technology enables, right? So this is things like verifiability, permissionlessness, autonomousness. We think it's vitally important to export those unique features into the AI context, because AI is the most impactful, most revolutionary technological change, certainly of our lifetimes, possibly ever.
Yes.
Right? Some folks are describing the AI revolution as the last revolution, right? Because moving forwards, everything will just be driven by, informed by, maybe actually undertaken end-to-end by AI, right?
Wow.
So I think there's never been a more important moment for humanity, basically, and I don't think that's hyperbolizing. I think it's just the case. And so given that context, it's so important that we are able to build into these technologies things like trust and loyalty guarantees, so that this technology that's going to shape everything that you do, it's going to shape how you form concepts about the world, right? Because it's going to shape the information that you're exposed to, the user interfaces that you're interacting with, the activities and friends that you're making, the content you're consuming, everything. You have to know that these things are built to be on your side, right? And not working to, optimize profit for a large corporation or to propagate a particular perspective or point of view. You have to be able to interrogate the models, you have to understand how your information is being used, and you have to be able to trust that the operation of this technology is in your best interest.
Wow, that's tremendously exciting. So for those of us who don't know Near, how would you describe its core mission and what sets it apart in the L1 space?
Sure, so it's a great question. So I mentioned we think of ourselves as the blockchain for AI, right? So what that means is we have kind of 3 key components. So the first component is indeed this layer 1 blockchain, right? And we like to say that it's one of the most reliable, so it's never gone down, never have any downtime. It's been 100% uptime since launch back in 2020.
Wow.
And it's also the most scalable because we have cracked and now live in, actually on mainnet sharding, right? So this means that we actually take the monolithic blockchain and we split it into a bunch of different parts, and they all get processed simultaneously. And you can actually dynamically increase or decrease the number of shards in operation. So right now, there are 8 shards. But theoretically, we could increase that as demand would increase. But they can also be reduced to the extent that demand reduces, but we've only seen more and more demand, so we've been creating more and more shards, and we have a core development team called Near One, and they look after core protocol development, and we believe that it's best in class, but it's also one of the very few blockchain execution layers and settlement layers that is capable of handling the amount of traffic and transactions that you will see when AI agents are actually executing millions or trillions of transactions, right?
Wow.
So scalability becomes absolutely essential, and we think Near's very well positioned from that perspective. So that's kind of bucket number one. Bucket number two is we have this stack of technology that we call the chain abstraction stack. And what that means in practice is, if you step back and take a look at the state of the blockchain industry right now, it's highly fragmented. There are thousands of different blockchains. There are hundreds of thousands of different pieces of infrastructure and bridges and wallets and all of the rest of it. It's very, very complicated from an end user experience perspective, right? So we strongly believe that if we want blockchain technology to be adopted by billions of people, and we think that it absolutely should be, and that's what success looks like, then you have to make it easy to use, and you have to abstract away all of that complexity, right? So in an ideal world, a user or even a developer or builder shouldn't have to navigate through all of the complexity. They shouldn't have to worry about, well, where's the tooling the best? Where's all the users? Where's the liquidity, right? They should just be able to build applications and just go. In the same way that if I want to send you an email, right? I don't need to know if I'm using Gmail that like you're also using Gmail, right? Or if you're using a different application, I somehow need to go through a different process.
Right.
No, emails just work, right? So we need to get to the same point in Web3. And so this chain abstraction stack has two key components, right? The first is what we call chain signatures. And this allows you to manage and interact with any digital asset on any piece of blockchain infrastructure from your Near account. So this is pretty cool, and we can go into the technical specifics in a bit, but it's a very powerful piece of technology. The second piece is called intents, and this is effectively a new type of transaction which allows you, instead of, let's say you want to do something on a cross-chain basis now, you've got to think about having wallets in different ecosystems. You need to have seed phrases for them. You need to think about bridging and wrapping assets. You need to think about paying gas, for example, in the canonical blockchain's native token currency, right? This is really complicated, right? So what Intents does is it simplifies all of that. No bridges, no multiple user interfaces, all from one place to do cross-chain swapping of liquidity seamlessly, again, across any piece of blockchain infrastructure. So you combine these two pieces together, and basically you can extend the Near protocol's functionality across any piece of infrastructure. And again, we think that for a scalable, viable future of crypto, you absolutely have to have this, so we're very excited about it. Yeah. And then the third piece is a lot of the AI work, what we call user-owned AI. And this is effectively taking a bunch of really exciting, cutting-edge AI implementations and tools and technologies that our co-founder of the ecosystem, Ilya Polosukhin, he's leading these efforts. He's a highly, highly qualified individual, both in Web3, having co-founded Near, but also in AI itself. He's a co-author of the AI paper, Attention is All You Need. And this is the paper that basically pioneered the transformer technology. Transformers power all of these large language models like ChatGPT. It's the T in ChatGPT. So it is very, very accomplished also in AI, and he's building a bunch of very interesting kind of bleeding edge tools and infrastructure and implementations, as I said, that kind of take the trust and loyalty guarantees and kind of other benefits of blockchain technology and building them in to AI. Wow. So it's privacy first, it's scalable, it's programmatic, and again, so all of these three pieces together make us the blockchain for AI. Wow,
that is tremendously exciting. You've worked with over 100 plus projects at Outlier Ventures. How did that experience shape your current work with the Near ecosystem?
It's a great question. So yes, when I was at Outlier, one of the things that we used to do is support the portfolio, right? And it's an accelerator business, so we were working with a large number of projects every year, and these were projects that would be working in different ecosystems, in different parts of the world, and also in different verticals, like trying to build different types of businesses. So I think it was a great privilege to get that level of breadth and depth of exposure. I think it's pretty rare, particularly in Web3. So I think it definitely helped me understand, from a founder perspective, like what are the typical pain points when you're trying to take a business from 0 to 1, or maybe even from 0 to 0.2 even, right? There are lots of things that that can feel very complicated or that can be hard to find just simple, actionable advice about. And so we try and bring that into our founder experience in Near, where we try and make it as easy as possible for folks to set up new businesses. And that's everything from making sure they have good legal and regulatory advice, which is definitely a must, and I'm happy to shout out about that. But also it's about how easy is the tooling, how easily can you operate on a multi-chain basis, how easily can you integrate AI tools and experiences, how easy is it for you to understand how everything works? So like, is the documentation good or not?
Yeah.
How easy is it for you to understand what the different journeys are through the ecosystem? You know, you might be a first-time founder, you might be a really mature revenue-generating business, and you need to know how the foundation and the ecosystem can support you. So we try and build these end-to-end holistic experiences that allow us to attract the best talent in Web3.
Amazing, amazing. All right, now it's time to get into the meat and potatoes of this conversation: regulation, risk, and real-world blockchain innovation. So, permissionless systems, legal friction. One of the themes you've championed is how permissionless systems clash with legacy legal frameworks. How is Near navigating that friction today?
That's a great question. So maybe just to do some context setting quickly.
Yeah.
So most traditional legal and regulatory frameworks today all around the world, they assume a kind of way of doing business that's centralized, right? That has intermediaries that are able to control access to different systems, right? So financial regulation is the best example, or the easiest one, and maybe the one that a lot of folks have had experience with, where there are business providers like advisors, brokers, various other types of folks that provide access to certain types of services or certain types of products. And the traditional regulator's approach is to say, well, right, we're going to find out who's responsible for these types of things. We're going to regulate you. We're going to make sure that you're doing things in a certain way, up to a certain standard. We're going to make sure that there's recourse if you do the wrong thing, or if you're, naughty with your client's money, whatever it might be. Because we as a regulator have, as desired outcomes, we want to make sure that, for example, the markets are healthy. We want to make sure that investors are protected. We want to make sure that the capital formation process is efficient, for example. Yes. And that's kind of, I've cribbed a little bit the SEC's kind of published policy kind of outcomes. So if you try and take that system and you apply it to blockchain technology, it becomes really complicated, because the whole point of certainly permissionless public blockchain infrastructure is that actually no one controls it, right? No one is able to direct the system to function in a certain way, right? This is what autonomous means, right? It functions in the same way for everyone, like according to preset parameters. Yeah. But also it's permissionless, so it works anywhere in the world. Anyone that has access to the internet and a pretty basic computer is able to make use of this infrastructure, which is amazing. Like as a principle, right, to be giving people access to this technology anywhere in the world, this is an amazing thing. Yeah. But it definitely makes regulation and law making around the technology really difficult, because you have to adopt an entirely different way of thinking, right? Yeah. So you can't say, well, let me find the person that's running this thing and regulate them, because actually no individual or even small group of individuals really is running it. You can say, well, there's a group of validators, for example, that are processing transactions on the network. That's one potential group, right? There's the developers who have built this thing and maybe they're maintaining it. That's another group. There's the folks that are providing capital. There's the folks that are building applications on top of it. There are the folks like the foundation who are providing support and fundraising and whatnot to the ecosystem, right? Yeah. There's so many different categories of actors. And traditionally, regulators have found it quite difficult to fit their existing models to that framework, right, for obvious reasons. And sometimes they've tried to force responsibility and liability onto one or more of those categories. Like in the US, we've seen historically, recently dismissed cases against, for example, the developers of Tornado Cash. There's been a bunch of cases against kind of developers more broadly that have been responsible for deploying the infrastructure or maintaining it, and not just in the US, in a bunch of different jurisdictions, right? So I think those types of cases, they demonstrate that friction. Yeah. And so you asked, how do we try and support the adoption of the technology, but also how it regulates to interface more effectively with it? We try and spend a lot of time in conversations with and educating lawmakers and regulators so they can really understand what makes the technology different. Yes. But also what actually the technology could enable from the perspective of actually delivering policy outcomes. Because like the really cool thing about blockchain tech is it's programmable, right? So you can literally program these systems and also build incentive models around them that could bring about the policy outcomes that you want, right? So for example, I talk a lot with regulators about zero knowledge proofs. And the reason that I do that is because right now, most legal systems, they have these what are called know your customer anti-money laundering requirements. And I'm sure we've all experienced that. It's like, oh, hey, Chris, you want to open a bank account? Cool, send me a copy of your passport. Send me a copy of the utility bill, your bank statement. And it can feel quite invasive. It's very slow. But also, it's quite dangerous, right? Because these documents are very sensitive. You're just attaching them to an email. You're sending them to someone at the bank who sends them to 10 other people. It's a very bad way of doing business. Now, the reason why these checks exist is because regulators and lawmakers, they want to try and minimize the amount of illicit activity in our financial systems, which I think is a policy outcome that we would all agree with, right?
Yes.
The reality is, though, that that's a very outdated way of doing things, and it creates lots of risk, not just for the organizations, but also for individuals. Like the number of data breaches, you get an email saying, oh, we're really sorry, someone hacked into our records. Now they basically know everything about you, from like birth to today, for example, right? So like, good luck with that kind of thing. And actually, the technology exists in the blockchain industry to do that better, right? So zero-knowledge proofs are a great example where you can actually confirm that, for example, a statement is true or false. Like, I don't know, Chris is of legal age, for example, so therefore he could buy alcohol. But I don't need to send you my driver's license to do that. You can use this zero-knowledge proof technology to actually confirm that I am of legal age without me having to expose the underlying personal data. And we see lots of really interesting implementations across Web3 of this zero-knowledge proof technology. And I try and help lawmakers and regulators understand how this is a better way to achieve your policy outcomes, leveraging the unique features of blockchain technology. So I think this is how we try and move the needle. It takes time, right? And it's difficult for governments and regulators to move really fast because they have to. They can't afford to move fast and break things because we're talking kind of nation-state level financial risks, systemic risks, and so they have to be careful and conservative. But with kind of small and steady steps, I think we're going to gradually see the needle moving.
What do you think is the biggest misconception that regulators have about decentralization?
Decentralization specific. Well, I think about our industry in general. I think the biggest one is that blockchain stuff. Isn't it all just for criminals? That's by far the biggest conception, and I think it's still something which a lot of pretty senior, relatively well-known politicians in particular will still often fall back on that refrain and they say, oh, well, this stuff, it's mostly just for criminals, it's for people who want to, hide what they're doing, don't want people to know what they're up to. And I mean, the pushbacks that I have to that, right, first of all, are wanting privacy is not incompatible with like a healthy society, and also it's not a question of criminality or not criminal, right? Privacy is just a fundamental human right, and it should be something that all governments are willing to support and embrace for their citizens, right? Number one. Number two, there is so much more to the blockchain industry than the alleged stories of criminality, right? Every industry, including traditional finance, right, has criminals and criminal activity.
Absolutely.
And some of the largest kind of financially enabled crimes ever have been in the traditional financial sector, right? So I think it's not reasonable to paint, the blockchain industry with this brush. Otherwise, we should do the same for traditional finance, which I think we'd all agree is not reasonable. And then the third thing, which probably is the most important point of all, is that actually one of the benefits of these public permissionless ledgers is that everything is recorded for anyone to see. And so actually, if you're a criminal, it's very hard to hide what you're doing. So actually, as we've seen, there are organizations that exist like Chainalysis, like Glassnode, etc. They can do analytics on blockchain transactions, and they are able to trace and track the funds that are allegedly associated with criminal activity way more efficiently than in the traditional financial system.
That's crazy.
So actually, my response when people say this to me is like, actually, guys, blockchain is better at preventing crime than the traditional financial system.
That is amazing.
It
is amazing. So this world of like legal ambiguity, how is Near helping founders kind of navigate it?
That's a great question. So we have a bunch of resources that we put out to the ecosystem. And also, we spent a lot of time working with our founders to help them understand what the different kind of legal and regulatory parameters are, but also to try and simplify the complexity, like I mentioned earlier. Like, in my experience, all that founders really crave is they just want to understand what they need to be doing in order to protect themselves and their business, and of course also to do things in a way which isn't breaking the law, right? Like people, again, contrary to some industry perspectives, folks aren't here to commit crime, right? They're here to build sustainable businesses. They're here to change the world. So we try and simplify that process. We have a great legal team at the foundation that works very closely with a number of our projects. And we try and be as accessible as possible to the ecosystem. So we often say to projects like, we are here, if you've got questions, if something isn't clear, come in and talk to us and we're here to help. So I think, that's about all that you can do. Sometimes folks don't want to come and talk to us. Sometimes folks have different perspectives, and that's completely okay as well. All we can do is make sure they have all of the information that they need to make the best possible decisions. Amazing.
So how are new legal structures or governance models evolving to support decentralized foundations and ecosystems?
I mean, the short answer is it's definitely picking up steam. I think a lot of the kind of structuring considerations historically for Web3 were, I guess I'd call them almost defensive, right? So they were designed to protect from potential regulatory interrogation, right? So the position in the US in particular was very complicated for Web3 for a long period of time. There was quite a lot of overt hostility, a lot of regulation by enforcement is how it's usually referred to, right? But the idea that the regulators don't publish particularly clear rules. They sort of purport to say, well, everything's really clear and fit for purpose, and then they come and sue everyone that tries to start a Web3-based business, right? That created a lot of uncertainty and therefore a lot of defensive legal structuring where folks would rely on legal structures, usually not in the US, to try and create distance and independence from, say, the founders and from the capital that's come into the ecosystem. And some of those structures are quite effective, right? So probably the most famous is the Swiss Foundation, right? This is where a number of the most well-known projects, Ethereum, Cardano, Polkadot, Near, we have, they're based in Switzerland. They use this legal structure. And it's what's called an orphan legal structure, so it doesn't have any owners. It just kind of exists, brought into existence when all the documents are signed, and it's set up for the benefit of the ecosystem. And it's important that it doesn't have any owners because the whole point of these pieces of infrastructure is that they're meant to be community owned and operated, right? So, but then there are a bunch of others. The Cayman Foundation is probably the most popular at the moment, but there's also been there are examples of Panamanian foundations, very popular, although reputationally maybe not always as kind of gold-plated as, say, Switzerland or Cayman, for reasons we can come back to. Singapore, there was a lot of structuring work done kind of 2020 to 2022. There are some regulators in the Middle East, like VARA in Dubai and ADGM in Abu Dhabi, that are also, they've released bespoke legal frameworks for digital assets. There's an ADGM foundation structure also that's quite popular that we have in the ecosystem too. So I think the short answer, there's also a bunch of newer ones in the US, like the DUNA and a few other things. Wyoming DAO legislation's been quite popular. And I think the short answer is that there's been some progress, but I'm really looking forward to seeing a lot more now that it feels the regulatory environment is a little bit more positive and open to good faith interaction so that people can be more creative. They can also lean more into what makes the technology unique instead of feeling like everything they're doing is designed to prevent potential hostility. This doesn't always make for the best decision making, right? Because you're optimizing for things that you shouldn't really have to optimize for.
I mean, definitely in America, it seems like the tide is changing.
It is. I mean, I think the innate lawyer in me can't resist to point out that actually from a black letter legal perspective, nothing has changed yet, right? There hasn't been new legislation passed. It seems certainly like, I mean, obviously there's been administration change at the SEC, so we have different folks making the key decisions, and we've seen some lawsuits have been dropped, which I think is great. But I think it's also true that the current US system, particularly around, for example, securities laws, regulations, I mean, these are acts from 1933, 1934. They're very, very old. They did not envisage the type of autonomous, permissionless technology that underpins blockchain, and so they need to be updated. And so I'm hopeful that there will be new legislation coming through this year, and again, all of the noises seem to be encouraging on that front.
Our first guest, Jonathan Farnell, Freedex He said the Howey test is based on like a lemon tree farmer or something,
It is.
something crazy like that. I didn't even know.
It's orange groves. It's
orange
based
groves.
on
It's orange groves.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So it doesn't feel very appropriate to the age
I was like,
of
what?
Dogecoin or Near or whatever, right? So, but yeah, I mean, this is the thing. This is the law. The Howey test is, for those of the listeners who don't know, is the U.S. test for determining whether something is a security.
Yeah.
And as security, the reason why this test is so important is that if something is a security, then it is very heavily regulated in the United States in lots of different ways, and it's federally regulated to be clear. And so this test was determined and confirmed by the Supreme Court back in, I think it's 1933, 1934. It's a very old case anyway. And the idea was, is there an investment of money in a common enterprise, basically with the reasonable expectation of profit from the efforts of other people, right? And this is a very open-ended, ambiguous test, and it's deliberately designed to be that way because it enables the regulator, if it sees some kind of edge case scenario that they think presents risk, to be like, we think that's also a security, right? And therefore we're going to regulate you like it's a security, and we're going to do all of the things that we need to do in order to protect investors, et cetera, et cetera. But it also means, because it's so ambiguous, that it can be subject to abuse, right? And I don't use that term lightly, but I think it's reasonable to say that some of the enforcement actions that have been taken are deliberately aggressive and are deliberately taking a kind of obtuse and unrealistic interpretation of these laws and regulations to bring about certain outcomes from a policy perspective that I think folks that are in the industry just wouldn't agree with.
Yeah, I think it's time for a refresh, though. We can all agree on that.
I think orange groves, we don't need to be talking about those anymore.
Yeah, that blew my mind. I knew about the Howey test. I just didn't know the background. I mean, that's just crazy. So Near's introducing tech like stateless validation and chain signatures. What excites you most about these innovations, and how do they change the game for scalability and UX?
Yeah, sure. So stateless validation, what that basically means is that when nodes are validating the network, right, they don't need to hold the entire state of the blockchain in their memory. And this is usually something which is required for most blockchain systems. And the trouble with that is that these blockchains, particularly after they've been around for a while, they become really, really massive. Like we're talking like terabytes and hundreds of terabytes of data.
Wow.
And that is not particularly practical for most folks to be running on their local machine, for example. And so when you want scalable pieces of blockchain infrastructure, you want it to be as easy as possible for folks to set up a validator node and to participate in securing the network and processing transactions. And so stateless validation now basically means that not everyone needs to hold the full state in memory, and so it just makes it much easier for nodes to be spun up, and therefore it makes the blockchain much more scalable. So,
I love that.
So that, as I said to you, if you believe that in the future there are going to be millions of AI agents conducting trillions of transactions on behalf of people, the blockchain substrate needs to be highly scalable to handle that, right? And so sharding, which was what I mentioned earlier, that the Near protocol has actually managed to implement, and stateless validation is a big part of that. It's therefore easier for you to chop up the blockchain into different pieces, is an essential piece of matching kind of scalability potential with the needs of that kind of agentic economy. Chain signatures you mentioned, which I touched on earlier, but this is the idea that you need applications, but also agents to be able to interact with any piece of blockchain infrastructure, but also any piece of off-chain infrastructure too. So like bank accounts, APIs at Amazon or Deliveroo or whatever it is, right? And so in order for you to do that, it's not feasible for any particular developer or agent to be like, well, cool, I can do anything that you want, but only on the Near protocol, for example. So, sorry, I hope that's okay. And the answer is, well, no, that's not okay for me. That's not very scalable. And nor does it create the best possible user experience. So actually, the chain signatures technology enables us to broaden the functionality of what it is possible to do within the Near ecosystem, like I said, to basically any piece of blockchain infrastructure. And so you want agents to be able to go anywhere and process transactions and execute actions anywhere, and this is how you do that.
That's amazing. So Near's push into AI-powered infrastructure is bold. So how do you see AI and blockchain paying off each other, or playing off each other in the next wave of app development?
Well, so I think I mentioned that AI is like the biggest revolution, technologically speaking, pretty much in the history of humanity, and I think I don't think that that's hyperbole. I think that, one, because AI will influence and progress all of the activities that we do. It's already writing a large amount of code, for example, like kind of globally. It's already doing a bunch of other things as well, and more than people realize. And I think that we're not too far away from a world in which you can imagine having, for example, $1 billion business, right? That's one person.
Yeah, I keep hearing this narrative.
Which is crazy, right? But I think it's also pretty exciting to think about the opportunities and the potential, right? You know now. You can use one of these agents or models. It can spit out, code for like an end-to-end application, right? Like in 20 minutes.
Yes.
And you can work with the agent. You can get it tied up, and you can deploy it, right? This used to be the work of an entire dev team sprinting for weeks to get to this point, right? So the productivity gains are massive, but also I think the freedom for individuals to kind of imagine and create businesses or things that they want to put into the world is also 100x'd.
Yeah.
And as I said, the key thing to remember, one of the reasons why blockchain technology was developed in the first place, right, was to create these ownerless, kind of community-owned, permissionless, autonomous pieces of infrastructure that have a different incentive model to the currently very dominant Web 2 approach, which is all about monetizing attention, right? So the idea is, and this is just one way of setting up an incentive structure, but it's the one that Web 2 kind of settled on, and it's one that they've become really good at, which is basically they want to capture your attention, and they want to monetize that attention, right? Which I think kind of they've gotten really good at, right? We all know how addictive our mobile phones are, right? And all the different applications. They have scientists literally working out how to best hack human beings' brains to make these services as addictive as possible, right? They want us to spend time and attention so they can monetize. It is working. And also remember that this technology already touches every aspect of our lives, right? It's like how you meet and, I don't know, like hook up with people and fall in love, right? It colors how we consume information. It colors how we get around. It colors how we order food and do our shopping. And pretty much every aspect of our lives is already influenced by the technology, right? It's very ubiquitous. And when you throw AI into this mix, like I just mentioned, it's going to be 100x more ubiquitous. It's going to literally touch and probably influence, but maybe even more than just influence, every aspect of our lives. And I personally believe, and we at NEAR believe, that it's vitally important that technology, instead of being corporate-owned, is user-owned, right? And the way that you can achieve that in the AI sphere is by bringing the technological guarantees around trust, around permissionless, around autonomousness from blockchain into the AI space. And then you can build incentive models where you're actually optimizing not for profit of the owner of these models, of the corporation, but actually for what is in the best interests of individual users, right? And I don't just mean so that they can make money, although that would be part of it, right? We should be being remunerated, for example, right? Whenever ChatGPT 4.0 runs a query, right? My data almost certainly is in there, so is yours, because they've scraped the entire internet, right? I don't get paid for that, even though I've given them some value, nor do you, right? But more importantly, I also can't interrogate the model. I can't lift up the hood and look at the weightings of the model. Like, how is this model making decisions? How do I even know, to be honest, right? If it's GPT's interface says that it's the 4.0 model, but maybe it's only the GPT-3 model because it's cheaper for them to run. But I have no way of determining that. But most importantly, I know that this model, right, is not producing answers and output that's in my best interest, right? They're producing outcomes and output that's in their best interest to make money.
Of course.
And this is what I mean by guarantees of loyalty. I think that we have to know that this technology is on our side, right? Is acting in our best interest, each individual person, preserving our privacy, helping us understand the trade-offs that we're making, helping us get fairly rewarded and remunerated when we're giving up value. We have to know that, and if we don't, I think the erosion of our autonomy and of our dignity online will just continue, and it's already been pretty severely eroded by this incentive model in Web 2. And a lot of folks don't necessarily realize the full consequences, but they will continue to get more and more pervasive and more difficult to reverse with AI into the mix.
I just love that you're having this conversation and building a business around it, because I just don't think there's so much AI talk. NVIDIA, Microsoft, OpenAI, and whatever, and they're making lots of money and they're going faster and faster. But I think what you're trying to do is bring it back to sort of the human focus as well,
Totally.
right? Which I love, which is the thing that always excited, I think, most of us about Web3, right?
I think it's meant to. I mean, I think technology in general, right, is the vision was always to make things better for people, right?
Right.
To, whether it's more efficient, more value, more free time, whatever it is. And I think that we've strayed from that path with this attention profit kind of cycle. And it's very important that we try and break that model and we give folks a better alternative that indeed leads to better outcomes for individuals.
I love it. All right, so this is the fun part of the interview.
Okay.
Lightning round. We're going to hit you with some quick questions.
Let's do it.
All right. First one, regulate or innovate? What's more important right now? Regulatory clarity or full speed ahead innovation?
I think this isn't going to make me popular with my legal friends, but I think it has to be innovation. Right?
Wow.
I think it's very important that regulation is considered, but it's more important that we continue to build the products and the services that we think will have value and will enable people to make that shift. Sorry, that wasn't very short. I guess I got to keep these short, right?
Yeah, it's lightning round.
Okay.
It's lightning round.
I'll be short over the next ones.
All right, stateless or state mess? What's one underappreciated breakthrough in blockchain infrastructure today?
Sharding.
Sharding. Explain sharding to anybody out there, because I think there's a bunch of listeners and viewers that may not have ever heard of sharding.
Sure. So blockchain, any given blockchain is like a state machine, right? The idea is that it keeps a record of transactions and it processes new transactions, right? And the way that it does that in a cryptographically secure way is it attaches new blocks on over time, and that's why it's called a blockchain.
Yep.
And every block contains the transactions that happened in that kind of series of operations on the blockchain, right? Now, many blockchains are what are called monolithic, right? So they're all just processed as one big state, one big machine, right? What sharding basically means is you take that one big state, that one big machine, and you just chop it up into chunks, and you process them in parallel, so at the same time.
Oh, cool.
And the reason why that's very powerful is the monolithic blockchain, to process all of that massive state, right, takes time.
Right.
When you break it up into chunks and process them in parallel, you can do it faster. So you can actually get more scale, which is what we were talking about for trillions of AI transactions, for example.
Amazing, amazing. I love that explanation. Token or turbulent? What's a common trap founders fall into when trying to launch a tokenized economy?
Can I give two answers?
Sure.
Okay, so answer number one would be trying to force a token on a product or a business or a service that doesn't need one.
Okay.
And I have to say, like, the VCs are a bit naughty in this regard, because this is often how they get particularly earlier stage liquidity out of investments. So there's often a lot of pressure on founders to do that, and founders should recognize that not all businesses need a token, right? So that would be my first point. The second one would be being too focused on the token and the token price, right? So as soon as you've launched a token, you have a lot of similarities with a publicly listed company, right? You have people who are holding an asset that's associated with your product or service. I'm not saying that all tokens are like publicly listed equity, because again, my legal friends would be shocked for me to make such an accusation. But it's definitely easy to get too focused and too caught up in folks' perceptions and expectations around how that token will perform in the market. And actually, the best thing that most founders can do is to focus on delivering the core products and services that really makes their business great.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that answer. Quadratic cool or just a tool? Is quadratic voting a silver bullet for governance or still experimental?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't think, if you look at Web3 writ large, I'm not sure that anyone has perfected governance systems. There's lots of different flavors. We in Near at the moment, we're fairly close to launching the kind of new governance framework, which is called House of Stake. We've experimented previously with a bunch of different implementations, including one where we actually had a one-person, one-vote system.
Wow.
That was, which is called the NDC, and it was a very interesting experiment. I think lots of positives, also quite a lot of complexities and negatives as well. And it's one of the things that makes blockchain extremely exciting, is there's all of this like real-time experimentation. But is it a silver bullet? No. I think it's part of the toolkit, the governance toolkit. I think it does have a lot of merit, and it works well in certain situations, but it's definitely not a panacea.
Okay. Near or nowhere? What's something that Near is doing that more people should be paying attention to?
That's a great question. Well, I think, honestly, I'd say there are two.
Yeah.
The first is the cross-chain liquidity and swapping mechanism that's called Near Intense. This is something that a lot of folks don't know about, but actually is already powering a large amount of kind of cross-chain liquidity and exchange. And we think it's the best in market solution. So I'd love for more folks to learn about that.
Yeah.
A great place to go and experience it is so Infinex, which is Kane Warwick's, who's one of the founders of Synthetics. New project, which is kind of trying to create a centralized exchange experience, but on a fully self-sovereign basis. Near Intent is powering a lot of their kind of cross-chain swapping activities. So, go check that out. I'd highly recommend it.
Yeah.
It's very cool, and we're big fans of Infinex and big supporters. The second piece I think is, what Ilya and the Near AI team is working on in the AI space that they've published some new papers on proof of response and a few other things. We have implemented, for example, inference in what are called trusted execution environments. So these are computing environments where they're fully encrypted. So even the company or the individual that's making the hardware available, they can't even see what's happening inside these environments. So it's very important when we're talking about, for example, bringing privacy guarantees into AI. This is one of the ways that you can do it. Yeah. So I think that would be the other piece, is just to check out the depth and breadth of what Ilya and the Near AI team are also putting out into the market.
Amazing. I love this question. Legacy or leapfrog? Can traditional finance institutions keep up, or will they get leapfrogged?
I think a good way of thinking about it, and I have to give a shout out to Charles Hoskinson, who I was talking to earlier today, who actually put this forwards, is that we shouldn't think about like DeFi versus TradFi. Ultimately, there should just be finance, right?
Love this.
And I think that there should be some kind of amalgamation of the best parts of what DeFi and Web3 enabled finance is able to bring to the table, as well as a lot of what the traditional finance space also brings to the table. Yeah. And I think that in the future, hopefully, we just have finance. We don't have DeFi or TradFi.
I love that. I love that. All right. I think I know your answer, but I'm not sure. AI or Web3 MVP? What's going to have a bigger impact in the next 2 years? AI or Web3?
Well, hopefully it is Web3. Web3 enabled AI.
I love
like what Near AI is building.
I love that. I mean, I just feel like a lot of the AI narratives right now are just getting a little stale and just a little,
I think there's always a lot of speculation and hype when new technologies come to market. Yeah. I do think that a lot of what's possible, even with existing technologies, is amazing. I mean, it's legitimately mind-blowing that I can sit down and I can have like I said, an end-to-end application for, ordering food online that it can spit out in 5 minutes or less, that I could literally deploy myself. I mean, this is incredible. So I think there is an enormous amount of substance, but equally, everyone is talking about it, including myself, in very hyperbolic terms, and there's always periods of time where the development and the user experience and what's possible isn't quite up to speed with how people are talking about the potential impact. So I think these things will ebb and flow inevitably, but I'm very confident, within the next 2 years, AI will have fundamentally transformed many different things about how we live life right now. Yeah, I mean, I uploaded a legal agreement just to pick out like some potential issues with it, and it spit it out and then sent basically a rebuttal letter to the person that sent it. I mean, it was crazy. But I'm thinking, like, if I was a lawyer, I would just be using that for that first thing, and then I'd be like, okay, that took me like an hour. It used to take me like 3, so I could probably build a client too, and like law firms are already using this technology, right? But I mean, they're also like, to the point about transforming business models. One of the things that most law firms traditionally have had to do, right, is they bring on new lawyers, junior lawyers, and they have to be trained on the job. They're called trainees in the UK, right? And as a former trainee lawyer, I can tell you that most trainees, they have no idea what they're doing. They make mistakes. They are potential liabilities, right? Because they screw something up that the partner doesn't catch, and then you've got a big problem, right? Yeah. So actually, the reason why firms do this is because they're investing in their partners of the future, right? So that these will be the people that will generate revenue for them in the future, so they have no choice but to take on that liability. Now, if I'm a partner running a law firm today, I might say, well, look, I could pick from a bunch of trainees that are really expensive, that don't know what they're doing, they make loads of mistakes, and basically they're just a cost and a potential liability to me. Right. Or I could plug in one of these models trained on my own set of precedents and legal agreements, and I could use that instead. And it's going to be cheaper, and it's going to be faster, it never gets tired, it very rarely makes mistakes. Right. And so for young lawyers, for example, coming into the industry right now, these are very challenging questions, because it will fundamentally shift how traditional business models, and it's not just true of the law, I think it's true of many of the kind of quote-unquote white-collar services industries, accountancy, investment banking, PE. My friend in finance, he's using AI to do all his research reports. Right. He spits it in, he's like, And how much longer before the partners or owners of these businesses say, you know what, I don't want to hire a new graduate cohort because that costs me millions of dollars. I'm just going to keep using the model instead.
100%. He already knows his time is getting limited, but he's like I'm basically at the twilight of my career, so I'm okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Right. But even with the legal agreement, I was still like, there is a need for that human touch at that final finish line.
Yeah.
But some of the busy work up front.
For now.
Right. Yeah.
That's the scary part.
Yeah, scary and exciting at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, look, I very much have an optimistic view of AI. Like, I think the most sustainable and kind of value generative version of the future is where AI is enhancing and enabling human beings to do more and to be more effective, not just fully replacing human beings and human interactions kind of on an end-to-end basis. This feels a bit more dystopian to me, but time will tell.
Yeah, amazing. Is this your first Paris Blockchain Week or no?
No, this is my third, actually.
Third, okay. Yeah. This is my second.
Okay,
so
nice.
We're just going to talk a little bit about Paris Blockchain Week. So general impressions, what's the most surprising or thought-provoking thing you've seen at Paris Blockchain Week this year?
It's a good question. I mean, I think it'd probably have to be the panel that I did this morning over on the main stage where we had a bunch of folks talking about kind of their predictions for 2025. And I think there was a lot of really interesting and challenging conversations. We kind of, as the panelists often do before we went up on stage, we kind of met before and introduced one another, and we were sort of saying, well, hey, listen, let's try and make it an interesting panel. Let's make sure that we don't all just agree with each other, which is what often happens in these types of situations, right? And actually, so we were all deliberately kind of maybe trying to push each other, disagree a little bit, and I enjoyed that experience because I think it made the conversation more interesting for us and also hopefully for the audience.
Amazing. So if there's one insight builders should take away from this week, what is it?
I guess it is, I mean, I probably said this last year too, but I think it's still true, which is, as an industry, we are much more effective and, frankly, much more powerful if we collaborate and work together constructively. There's a lot of zero-sum thinking in Web3 in general, right? I don't know. I want my chain to be the winner, and I want to capture all the value. And actually, I mean, I firmly believe that the future will be very multi-chain, which is one of the reasons why the chain abstraction technology is so important. Yeah. But also, again, I mean, people say this a lot, but the industry is still very much in its infancy. Yeah. And rather than fighting over a tiny slice of a tiny pie, we would be much better off, all of us, trying to just grow the pie. And, the rising tide lifts all boats. So I think when you come to events like this, where you see the diversity of attendance, you see the quality, you see how there's so much collaboration space, it's a reminder that the collaboration mindset is really what's most valuable.
It's amazing. So beyond regulation, what's one trend that could shape the second half of 2025?
That's a great question. I mean, I think there are a few. So one thing might be, and this is like a slightly negative framing, but I still think that it's relevant, where certainly in the second half of 2024, a kind of a theme or a trend that was attracting loads of attention, also lots of capital, were meme coins.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
And everyone, when like grandmas are asking people about like, what is this dog with hat thing?
Yes.
You know that it's definitely had cut through.
Yes.
And again, I think meme coins have their place, and I think they're great community building tools when deployed in the right way. But also, right now, there are literally thousands of them being launched every day, right? And that's not like literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands being launched every day. It's very easy to do. You can do it with like 2 clicks now, right?
Yeah.
My hope is that some of the steam and the heat has come out of that market recently. I mean, along with the rest of the market, it's a very tempestuous time out there.
Yeah.
And my hope is that perhaps the attention and the capital can be get attached to things that have more longer term sustainable value creation, and maybe are also more value aligned with some of the values that define the industry. I think this would be. I think we have an opportunity for that to happen. There's so much of value, there's so much utility, there's so much kind of sustainable work that's being done.
Yes.
And I think it's really important that we as an industry try and promote and lift up that work to make it clear that this is actually what the industry and the technology is capable of, and we're more than just being a giant casino, which again, like, it has its place, and I'm not criticizing or dismissing it, but I think we could we could get the attention, the capital more evenly divided across other things that are also being done in our industry.
I don't think it helped that President Trump here in America, did a meme coin drop.
It depends, it depends on your definition of help and who you're talking about, but yes.
Right, yeah. I think his son's got one plan. It's crazy.
Indeed. The whole family was jumping on the bandwagon, it seems. So yeah, I mean, but look, again, it was a moment that meant that millions of people heard about blockchain, maybe for the first time, right?
Yes.
So I think, there's the old saying, there's no such thing as bad publicity.
Yes.
I think it's probably got some validity here, even if you don't necessarily agree with the entire the entire thing or how it was implemented or the values behind it or whatever. Everyone has lots of different views about it.
Yeah, but it's pretty obvious he's going to break down as many of these barriers to getting things moving on that front.
It certainly seems like he's willing to be more decisive and more interventionist than certainly any sort of president before.
Maybe we get those tariffs on the blockchain, right?
Absolutely.
Final question: why is this moment so critical for decentralized systems, and how can the Near Foundation lead the way?
So I think the reason why it's so critical is for the reason that we touched on earlier, that we have these enormously dominant platforms and organizations, right, that have captured most of the activity on the internet, most of the way that we interact with the internet. And it's made a small number of people an enormous amount of money, and we don't have a lot of control or empowerment, no privacy. It's a system that's not fit for purpose, in my view, right? And I think that if you deploy AI at scale in that system, then you're just going to scale the problems, right? The existing problems,
right?
Which will lead to bad outcomes for users. And we are very much at a kind of tipping point here, where if we want AI to scale, but we want to implement a better system than the current Web 2 incentive model, now is the moment that we need to bring these products to market, that port over those trust guarantees, privacy, all of the verifiability, all the rest of it from Web 3, but also give people a reason to want to use these products because they can actually do things that, for example, Web 2 implementations just are not capable of doing. So that's why I'd say that. So now is the moment, and I think 2025 in particular is a very important year for Web3 to hopefully bring additional products to market that have a good product market fit, and that are magical experiences for users.
Yes, I would love some of these ideas that happened maybe 2 or 3, 4 years ago in the Web3 space. Maybe dust off the cobwebs and now look at them again with a different lens, and now you have AI to help you as your running mate. And
100%.
I think it's exciting time.
It's a massive opportunity, definitely.
Massive. And like you said, like there's going to be one person, billion-dollar unicorns being built, right?
And I mean, do you want Sam Altman to know everything about the deepest, darkest parts of yourself and also to make a lot of money off it, or would you rather that to be something that you can control, right, and feel empowered?
Super exciting. So what is the best way for people to learn about Near Foundation and you as well?
So, I mean, the first thing I'd say is anyone who wants to hear more about what we've been talking about, we can reach out to me directly, right? I'm on Twitter /X. Very easy to find. More broadly, near.org is the kind of ecosystem website that the foundation maintains. We're actually in the process of updating it right now, but it's a great place to start. There are a whole bunch of so we have some of the largest projects in Web3 actually in the Near ecosystem. So we have Sweat, which is a kind of be fit to earn application. We have something called Cosmos Kaiko, which is like a shopping and loyalty rewards program. So basically get rewarded for doing the shopping that you would do anyway, but also do it in a more kind of privacy enhanced way. So I'd encourage folks to go and check those out as well. And then more broadly, we have a great foundation team. There's lots of folks out there got their sleeves rolled up, ready and willing to help. So if anyone wants to learn more, just reach out to one of us and we'll take it from there.
Amazing. This was an amazing interview. I learned so much. I'm sure everybody listening did as well.
Very kind of you.
And hopefully we can do this again.
Absolutely. I loved it. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Thanks.